This is Phil McCauley for Labour Business TV, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Jane Caldwell, the Chief Executive of Age UK East London. Jane, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Phil. Thank you very much for inviting me into this conversation. I'm good. It's a difficult word to use, given our experiences during the pandemic. But I think I was sort of reflecting the other day that being sort of in the epicenter very often of the pandemic, the positive thing about that is that you can make a difference, and the negative thing about that is that you're in the middle of the pandemic, and there has been, as you can imagine, a significant fallout, particularly in London, but initially in London.
So thinking about this in a wider context, if we go back, say, 10 years, we had a change of government, Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition came in under Cameron, and then began the whole era of austerity. What was the impact, in particular, for the elderly in the UK? And where did that leave us when it came to an event like the pandemic?
Well, I think there's two things that I'd reflect. The first is a kind of policy failure that's been ongoing for many years around social care. And then there's the added challenge of repeated austerity, underfunding, lack of resources, all in the context of the clearly very obvious reality that the older population was accelerating. And the length of unhealthy years at end of life was increasing. It's not a surprise that we turn around and suddenly we've got an escalating older population. Clearly, that's been known for a very long time. And one of the challenges around it is that there has been a lot of conversation around the integration of health and social care, and that's actually had some cross-party agreement. But the integration of health and social care, firstly, it doesn't work if you've got a massively underfunded health system. And secondly, even worse than the underfunded health system is the lack of conceptual clarity around social care and the massive underfunding. So the threshold for getting care has gone up and up and up. So you've got increasingly older people who need some help, less capacity to give them any support. Inevitably, all of this was playing out before this crisis. So it's the same everywhere. It's the same in terms of hospital admissions. You know, the threshold for getting a hospital admission has gone up everywhere. Everywhere those thresholds have gone up, leaving a sort of army of older people without any care and support. As the health and wealth inequality has increased, you know, it's of no surprise to all of us working out in the community that this pandemic was going to sweep through them.
Yes, that makes sense. I mean, for everyone who needs to understand a bit more about Age UK and the work you do in the community, could you just characterise that for us in a normal basis, and then explain what you've had to do in particular, in addition, during the pandemic?
Yeah, so Age UK is a federation, and so there's the sort of national body, and then there's a number of brand partners across the country, of which Age UK East London is one. And we are effectively an independent charity with a brand partnership agreement with Age UK. We're working across a number of boroughs across East London. Before the pandemic, we were doing hospital discharge, for example. So we'd be supporting older people home, getting their confidence, getting them back on their feet, working with them to get them back out into the community. We do home and care, so domiciliary care, advice, information, advocacy. We run activities, and essentially we develop our services according to our very diverse local boroughs, the demographics in our boroughs. We do some digital inclusion, you know, lots of different services. The change, I would say, is that about 2 weeks into the pandemic, we were one of the few organisations that were, because we have a history of working of infection control, of a certain training in a clinical environment. Our staff carried on working right the way through this pandemic. They're trained to do that. So that meant that we carried on working in older people's homes. Mm-hmm. We then pretty much in the first month really provided a sort of agile humanitarian response, if you like. So, you know, as most people will be aware, anyone who was rough sleeping needed to go somewhere. So we started off by supporting people who've been rough sleeping, who've been admitted to hospital, supporting them home from hospital. And then they were put in various different hostels, a travel lodge, you know. So once we started supporting rough sleepers in a travel lodge, then other cohorts started arriving. So rough sleepers who had been directed from the street into the travel lodge, women who'd been escaping domestic violence, people with no recourse to public funds. And we were pretty much providing sort of basic humanitarian care. So we're giving people phones, we were giving people welfare packs, we were providing them with food. I think over this period, we've delivered 76,000 meals. We've escorted 1,500 people home from hospital. I mean, it's been very intense.
Very, very significant and very heroic, if I might add, in relation to the dedication of you and your team and your staff.
Yeah, staff have been amazing.
What is your sense in terms of government policy? Obviously, you'll have a very clear and direct insight and evidence-based perspective on all this. It seems to me that there have been some shortcomings. What has your experience been, and what do you feel needs to change given that experience? Yeah,
so where do you start? That's there are many sides to that question, and so we've all been waiting very patiently for. Initially, it was a green paper on social care that was supposed to come out, I think, in 2015. Then it was supposed to be coming out in 2017. Then there was an announcement that there was going to be a white paper coming out in 2019. And then it's, you know, I remember Boris Johnson on the steps of Downing Street promising that he would sort social care out once and for all. So there's the challenge around social care. It's clearly that it's hugely underfunded. But added to that is the way that it is commissioned is not helpful to delivering person-centered care. So without going into too much detail, it's commissioned under what's called a task and time framework. And that means you have a certain amount of time to go into somebody's home, and you have some tasks that you have to do, and then you have to go. And that is not conducive to supporting people in a person-centered way. And I'll give you a very good example. This is a common experience for us. We will arrive at somebody's door, they don't answer. We have to bang on the door, where, you know, that takes a certain amount of time. You're looking through the letterbox, you're looking through the windows because you're concerned they're not answering the phone. Eventually you see that perhaps they're on the floor. You then have to phone the police because you can't kick the door down yourself. You have to wait for the police to arrive. The police kick the door in, and that person is lying on the floor because they fell over in the night and they're dehydrated and delirious. You then wait with that person. You then go with them in the ambulance to the hospital, because who would leave that person on their own? That's not a nice way to be treated. No dignity in that. Go to the hospital. 8 hours later, you finish your session with that person, but you're paid for an hour's work for that. And so all the time, you're trying to weigh up, how do you deliver a humane service and not subsidise it in the most enormous way to the point where you go under. And that's a problem for us, but it's also a problem for all the private care organisations. Obviously, we're a charity, but there are many private care organisations that are having to hand their contracts back. It's ineffective. It's completely ineffective as a way of supporting people and improving their well-being in the community. There needs to be a different approach that's more radical. If you look at what's happening at the moment, coming out of this pandemic, there's going to be a lot of people who are very far away from the labour market. There's opportunities to look at a different way of the community supporting itself, of looking at things like co-ownership, shared ownership. And it's the same with the care homes. We've got a similar issue. They're underfunded. There's fragmented infrastructure, as has been played out violently during this period. We've all seen the results of this. That they're not all joined in this marvelously cohesive structure where you can issue a guideline and miraculously they're all going to, it just doesn't work like that in reality. You've got all kinds of different care homes. Some are in one house, some are in a massive new block. When you're talking about isolating people, just as a one-off example, it depends on what your space is, whether you can isolate anybody within your home. It's very complex. There's a lot of complexity around that. Most care homes are owned privately. Some are owned by local authorities. Neither of which work particularly well. It's true to say. There are some care homes which are fantastic and are in areas where they're able to charge very high fees. But my mother, for example, was in a care home. It was amazing. The staff were amazing, but it was still pretty difficult. It's not somewhere that you'd be voting to go into. You know what I mean? It just needs a radical rethink.
Okay, so let's just put you in the hot seat for a minute. So there you are. You're around the cabinet table with the Prime Minister, with the cabinet. You've got an opportunity to dictate to them the new kind of policies that you want to see. What would be your priorities?
So I think there has to be an understanding. That's again a multifaceted question. I think the first thing I would reflect to the Prime Minister is that everybody, if they're lucky, is an older person in waiting. There's a sort of cultural view that old age is an illness, and in fact, we're all hopefully going to get old, and with that comes certain things that are likely to happen to us in the later part of our life. And it's more than just a policy question, this. It's about the dignity of aging well in our society that sits behind it before you even get to the question around policy. We talk about, and it's been played out during this pandemic, we talk about older people as if they're a burden. They feel they're a burden. It's not the social contract we have is broken, I would say. I'm waiting for, in fact, him to blame older people for getting old, because he's clearly now he's blamed care homes for not following procedures in a way that they should. I'm wondering what's next. And so then you're looking at what are people's rights in terms of their, people have been paying into the health and social care system all their lives. And yet that's forgotten when you get into old age somehow. Somehow your needs you have to pay for as if you haven't been paying for it all your life into a kind of big insurance plan, if you like. It's really unfair.
So there needs to be a new deal in old age, essentially.
There needs to be a completely new deal, and we need to stop infantilising older people. It really is diabolical the way we talk about, you know,
Yeah.
older people. We need to work with older people to sort out the way they want to be cared for. And I think localism is a way forward as well. You know, there are some really great initiatives around the country in terms of getting really place-based, local communication systems, of having a system which is picking up the needs of a very small area and finding ways to support each other in a mutual way, rather than in this, oh, we're going to deliver a service to these people, which is a very old-fashioned paternalistic view of, you know, we've got to shake it up, disruptive, and be a lot more radical.
Very interesting. So a lot of decentralisation, in effect, giving more responsibility to the local knowledge, the ability to determine the necessary budget, and to feed into a national framework that sets standards but isn't running the local requirements as a template. That's
you have to do that, and then you have to fund them properly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, just turning to the Labour Party for a minute, of course, Keir Starmer's taken over 3 months ago. He's starting to become quite vocal about this issue, perhaps many issues right now. But what's your message for him in terms of how he needs to behave, holding the government to account and thinking about the future shape of Labour policy in time for the next election?
Well, I think one of the things he's doing quite well, which is that which is forensically kind of undoing some of the less than accurate statements from the government, I would say.
There's a word for
that. Yes. I think that's needed. That's really, really needed. I'm nervous that democracy is losing its legitimacy at the moment, and I think this kind of forensic examination is part of getting some of that legitimacy back. I think the other part of it is that I'm listening to people who understand how this is, or how particularly in this respect, health and social care is playing out, being prepared to be more radical and innovative and disruptive. It needs to sit alongside it. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's two different ways of working, isn't it? One is granular detail, forensic, and the other is we have to think big right now.
That makes sense. And just in terms of the model and how it operates, because of course there are many, as you say, charities and good organisations doing their work. And there's also many private companies, small and large, providing different layers of adult social care as we age. Does there need to be a new settlement between all those parties? It does seem to be quite postcode lottery based in terms of what you can get. Yeah,
it's really postcode lottery based. But I think the good thing about the pandemic, of which there have been many bad things, but the good thing is that it has fostered a urgency around different sectors needing to work together in a shared partnership. And so I think there is an opportunity to do that, but it needs to be harnessed now. You know, I sit on the London Care Homes Oversight Group, and you've got representatives from different sectors, from private care homes, from healthcare, from social care, from third sector. Everybody is very focused on the challenges that the pandemic has critically revealed, if you like. So there's an opportunity right now to harness this kind of speed and acceleration.
That's amazing. And finally, as we think more deeply about the impact that your organisation has on citizens in our country as they age, how important is it to have this lifeline, this human connection, this structural service? What does it mean to everybody in their lives as they face those challenges?
I think I think I remember seeing a really interesting study which showed that one of the biggest causal factors of heart disease, for example, is lack of social interaction. And then so there's lack of social interaction, and then there's loneliness, of which that is not just a challenge for older people, it's a challenge for all of us. And one of the amazing things, I think, for myself that has come out of this period is that because we've all had to connect on the whole to each other virtually, there are two things that have come out of that. One is we need to make the virtual world work better. And the other is the need for face-to-face, close work with people in the community. So it's kind of reinforced this need. Virtual by default is not going to work. It's not going to work. We all need human social interaction. It's hugely important. You need people to look forward to. You need people to talk to. You need to share your concerns. All the things that we all need. You need love. You need something to look forward to, etc. All those things cannot be, in my opinion, held in the virtual world. They just can't. So that's my tree hugging response to that question.
Jane, thank you very much for being my guest today, and let's hope we can spread the word about the New Deal being of primary importance. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.